Center for Ethics and Public Culture and its director, David Solomon. I want to welcome you here tonight, and I want to extend an invitation to you to come back tomorrow and enjoy all the offerings that are happening in this first conference, this Culture of Death, presented by the Notre Dame Center for Ethics and Culture. Electricity has filled the air in this room since last night when Judge Noonan gave the keynote address. At 9 o'clock this morning, Alistair McIntyre addressed the group. The room was filled, upstairs and down. Can you imagine that? 9 o'clock in the morning for a philosophy lecture in a filled room and filled with excitement. So please come and join us. Tonight we have the special treat of having Sister Helen Prejean here. Sister, you know, is the author of Dead Man Walking. I don't have to tell you that. Everyone knows that. Sister was born and raised in Louisiana and has worked in Louisiana her whole life. As a daughter of Southern privilege, as a daughter of Southern gentility, she often wonders, she often pauses and thinks about her strange journey from the world of white gloves and party manners to death row on Angola prison. Now, like all women religious of her generation, and I want to pay tribute to those women tonight, like all women of her generation, she has paid her dues. She taught junior and senior high school students, she served as the director of formation in her community, and she has served as the director of religious education in her parish. She is part, and continues to be part, of that powerful sisterhood that is found at more than 300 hospitals and 800 institutions of education in the United States. In 1981, she began her work in St. Thomas Housing Project with poor inner-city residents, and she began counseling death row inmates at the Louisiana State Penitentiary. She now also works with the families of those who were murdered. She has heard their righteous indignation, and yet she knows that they must be healed too. She founded a group in New Orleans to assist those families. It is called Survive. The rest of that story you will hear from her. Sister was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize in 1998, 1999, and 2000. Many of us were up at 4:30 this morning, flicking on CNN, waiting for the announcement to come down. Maybe next year. Sister has received the highest award that Notre Dame has to give, the prestigious Laetare Medal. She received the Champion of Liberty Award from the United States Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers and the Sanctity of Life Award from the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. She has received more than 25 honorary degrees. Watch out, Father Hesburgh, here comes Sister Helen. Including degrees from Georgetown, Amherst, the University of Glasgow in Scotland, and the University of San Francisco. Sister travels internationally, but especially in the United States, in her efforts to educate people about the death penalty. She is the honorary chair of Hands Off Cain, an international group based in Rome working on the abolition of the death penalty. She is a member of Amnesty International and its United States Coalition to Abolish the Death Penalty, on whose board she has served for 10 years. In 1999, she gave the Distinguished Ethics and Public Life Lecture at King's College, following in the footsteps of such notables here as Judge John Noonan, author and child advocate Jonathan Kozal, and Notre Dame's own John Robinson. Sister Helen's influence is felt in the classroom, in churches, in legislatures, in the office of the powerful in both the secular and the ecclesiastical world, in the hearts and minds of all who listen and hear her story, and the story of those that she has accompanied on their journey. Please join me in welcoming Sister Helen Prejean to Our Lady's University.
Thank you. Sometimes when I hear those introductions, I say, after that, I can't wait to hear what I'm going to say. Dead Man Walking the Journey. What I want to do with you tonight is take you to some core aspects of my own journey, which is, as I travel this country and speak to groups, I take them with me on this through storytelling. which I've been doing now for 15 years, since I came out of the execution chamber in 1984 after Patrick and watched a man be killed in the electric chair in front of my eyes, and been telling the story ever since. I'm going to take you through some of the core parts of the journey, and then I want to share with you 3 art forms that have been developed. The Opera of Dead Man Walking just opened in San Francisco, a modern opera. The movie Dead Man Walking, the film, just a little bit about that and how that was done. And then Tim Robbins on October 20th is sending me the script of the play, the theater piece for Dead Man Walking, and want to talk to you about that. Because every time we get an art form, we have a way that people can perform it, and it's a way of bringing people into reflection through the telling of a story and through drama and through music, which, as we know, can bring us into areas of our heart that maybe we don't even know we have. To kind of set the stage, in terms of what we're dealing with the death penalty, Tim Robbins was telling me once about his favorite cowboy movie. As a kid, he loved this film. In the opening of the film, this bad guy comes and kills this cowboy's wife. And the whole movie is about the cowboy going to get the bad guy, killed his wife, to get revenge. The whole movie's about that. You come into the end of the movie, and he's got him. The guy's fallen over a rock. He doesn't have his gun. He's sprawled out in the sand. The guy's got his gun, and he's over him and pointing the gun right between his eyes. And the moment's arrived. And the cowboy says, "Nah, I'm better than you." Takes the gun, puts it in his holster, and rides off into the sunset. Tim says, if that movie was shown today, people would boo. They would say, "You wuss." If he blew him away, people would cheer. Because make my day, he got his vengeance. And that's an atmosphere that we're dealing with where vengeance has been legalized, it's been legitimized, and sometimes it's even been sanctified when people use their little selective quotes to quote the Bible. They have God back them up on what they already made up their mind they believe anyway, if you know what I mean. But the core of the journey for me begins because I got involved with poor people, and that was a spiritual journey. And in Dead Man Walking, I had never written a book before. I was an English major, loved writing, kept a journal. But when I went to write that book, instinctively, I just wrote it first person, present tense, so that as it happens for me, it happens for you at the same time. And the first part of that journey was getting involved with poor people. Because the whole first part of my religious life, and I've always loved what I've done, I've always loved the people I've served. It's not like there are only certain people who are worthy of our love and our service. We got to go across the bridge all across society to serve people. But I really didn't know any poor people. Plus, all that discussion that was going on in the community about social justice, I didn't buy. I said, look, we nuns, we not social workers. How are we going to pick up all of this stuff about poor people and justice and housing and racism and all this kind of stuff? It was so overwhelming to me, I didn't know how to put my hand on the rope. Plus, I was never in the company of anybody who was poor and struggling. Kind of like the little girl at time was asked to write the essay on the poor. That was the name of her essay, The Poor Family. Topic sentence. I was also an English teacher. Once there was a very poor family. The mother was poor and the father was poor. The children in the family were very poor. And then she goes, and the gardener was poor, and the chauffeur was poor, and the butler was poor. It was a very poor family. Well, in a way, that was me. Because if we're never in the company of people, we don't know. And so we're prone to believe every stereotypical thing we hear about those people, and they sucking up tax dollars, and they want to be on welfare. They could get a job if they wanted to, all that kind of stuff. The turning point in my heart came when Sister Maria Augusta Neal, this great sister, school sister de Namur, talked to us, gave us a conference for 3 days in Terre Haute, Indiana. I'll be going back there soon to see a man on death row in a federal death sentence who wants to give up his appeals. I haven't been back to Terre Haute since this time of enlightenment for me through Sister Maria Augusta Neal. When she talked about The whole first day was on the first world, third world. I knew there were problems. I knew some people were poor. I knew some people had too much. I knew there were injustices in the world. I knew a lot of the statistics about it. And on the second day, she's going to talk about Jesus. I thought I was home free. Because, like, excuse me, but I've been meditating on Jesus for about 35 years. I mean, I think I know a little bit about Jesus, right? And I can tell you the line. I'm going along, and she said, and Jesus preached good news to the poor. And I think I know the next line. That's when it's dangerous for you. When you think you know the next line, you get a curve. Because then she said, but integral to the good news that Jesus preached was that they would be poor no longer. And I got it. Because Jesus just didn't preach a spiritual message. Jesus inaugurated a new kind of community where everyone would be treated with dignity and no one was in need. And so you get into justice, and so you get into all the human needs of people being hungry and people being without homes and people being without whatever they're without. I got it for the first time. I had been working toward it, and I had been agitating around. You know, Ignatius of Loyola in Discernment of Spirit says that the Spirit of God moves in us. If you ever read the Rules of Discernment of Ignatius Loyola in Spiritual Exercise, sometimes the Spirit moves in us like water that falls on a blotter. It's real peaceful. Sometimes the Spirit moves in us through agitation, when we need to jump the groove, get out of where we are. And I had been in a very agitated state about all that social justice stuff that was being debated in the community. And we kind of like divided into two teams, the spiritual sisters and the social justice sisters. And the spiritual people are saying, and I'm leading the pack, well, if the poor have God, they have everything. Not by bread alone do people live. And then on the other side, it's like justice. And our missionaries from Latin America challenging us. Nobody is with poor people. How are we going to be on their side? How are we going to be in solidarity with them? And when I heard us say that, an integral to the good news that Jesus preached was that they would be poor no longer. I started doing simple steps. It's all about pilgrimage. It's all about the following of Jesus and the imitation of Christ. Is not just at some spiritual level. It's in very physical steps that we take. And one of them for me was to go to soup kitchens, to go to the inner city, to go where poor people were. And then whole other parts of my heart began to open up because I met real people. And that's what led me into the St. Thomas Housing Projects, not with a blueprint in my back pocket of how we're going to eradicate poverty and racism, but simple being neighbors with people, living alongside people, learning people, being with them in what they were suffering and what they were going through in their lives. Sometimes the sisters walking to Mass in the morning and blood on the sidewalk, sometimes hearing the gunshots at night, and mothers rushing out of the house to see if it's their child, because they don't have a choice about where they're going to live, in what neighborhood. They can't afford rent in any other neighborhood. They're forced to live there. Just beginning to accompany people, to be neighbor to people, and to learn from people. And that's when I really got in touch for the first time that I was a child of privilege. People are coming into the Adult Learning Center at St. Thomas, and they've been through the 11th grade in the public school, and they can't read at the 3rd grade level. And I'm thinking of St. Joseph Academy and Sacred Heart School where I had gone. By the time I was a senior, my gifts had been developed. I could read any book I put my hand on. It prepared me for studies in college, went to college, got a master's. And here they are, and they struggle, and they can't write a sentence, and they can't do basic math, and they don't have a choice as to what school they're going to. The public schools are their only choice, and that's what was happening to them. And so it's like I hunkered down, and I began in my heart, a fire for justice began, and that's the gift of grace that happens to us. Because when we are in the presence of people who are suffering, and who are suffering injustice, and when we're looking into their eyes and we're hearing their stories and we're wiping away their tears as they tell us about their son who's brought to jail, or their son like Rufus Smith who was shot in the back by the police and they took the T-shirt so he could never prove it, something begins to happen to us. And what happened to me was a passion was born, and that the gospel of Jesus was linked to justice, and that in my little small way, I didn't know what I was going to do, I was going to be a part of that, and I'd be faithful to that. And I'd be a servant of that. And then one day coming out of Hope House, but see, I was in the soil. First, we got to get in the soil. And the soil is where poor and struggling people are. However, we got to get to them. They sure not going to come to us. We got to go to them. Which means we got to deal with the fear that's in our society, because we are afraid to go into certain places of our city. We're afraid of people. And then coming out of the Adult Learning Center one day on St. Andrew Street, it was so casual. This is, we talking about something so casual. There ought to be whole courses taught here at Notre Dame on the sneakiness of God, part 1, 2, and 3. Graduate level sneakiness of God, part 6. Because what happened is I was coming out, and here was a friend from the Prison Coalition office, and he met me, had a little clipboard, had a little project going. He said, "Hey, sister, you want to be a pen pal of somebody on death row here in Louisiana?" It was 1982. We hadn't executed anybody in Louisiana since the 60s. I think all I'm going to be doing is writing some letters. I say, yeah, sure. He writes the name of this man down on this little white piece of paper, Patrick Saunier, and his prison number and his address, and I'd never in my life seen an address like that. Death Row. Who did I know lived on Waiting to Die Street or Death Row Street? I mean, you know, even if it's Avenue A, that's pretty bland, but Death Street was like, wow. And I wrote the man, and the man wrote back. And I wrote and he wrote, and I wrote and he wrote. And this little trickle of water starts going across the sand. The personal human contact that explodes everything for us and brings us down paths that we never know that we're going to go down. And it was with this one man in the beginning, this man Patrick Saunier, who was so glad that I had found him. He never asked me for anything. He just said, "Sister, thank you for your letters. It's been so lonely." And I would write and tell him about stuff going on at Hope House, and he'd write about life in a 6-foot by 8.5-foot cell. And so glad when the summer would end in Louisiana, because the cells were back to back. There were only 2 fans at the end of each tier, and just suffering through the heat, sometimes taking the sheet off of his bunk and wetting it in the lavatory and putting it down on the cement floor to get a little coolness. And God help you don't get sick. God help you don't ever have a wisdom tooth that has to be extracted. Because once you're in a society that has already mandated that you're not worth living, you think they're going to take you to the dentist and have a wisdom tooth taken? Or you need glasses to see with? You need bifocals so you can't read? Do you think they care about that? See, because once we had posited, as the U.S. Supreme Court did in that Gregg decision of 1976, that we could execute human beings. And notice that they said in that decision, quoting Furman in 72, "It is not against the dignity of a human being to execute them." Then, of course, so you don't have health care. So, of course, you're a little hot in the summer. And people die because they don't have health care. Health care isn't even part of it. Although you hear weird stories sometimes of one death row where they gave a guy a triple bypass, and then they executed him afterwards. You know, it's because once you get on the death road and that this person's not human like the rest of us, a lot of things go in the process, including the decisions that quickly followed in the U.S. Supreme Court, that not only was it not against the dignity of human beings to execute them, but we could execute the mentally retarded and we could execute juveniles. And you got to know, right now in the world, we are one of only 2 countries that allows people who did a crime below the age of 18 to be executed. And it's why the United States hasn't signed the Convention on the Rights of the Child, because we want to be able to execute children. And that would mean that we would have to say, no one below 18 when they do a crime could be executed. It's a world I begin to descend in. I don't know nothing from nothing. Who knows anything about these things when you start getting involved? He's a man. He wrote a letter. And I realized he doesn't have anybody to come see him. And it all unfolded like a rose, like the petals of a rose. And the Spirit of God works with us. There's this organic unfolding, step by step. And my heart is moved. He's alone. He's condemned to death. I just wrote him in a letter. I said, I'll come see you. Well, he's so excited. Come see you. We have 5,000 guys in maximum security at our prison at Angola. Half of them have never received one postcard or one letter, much less a visit from any human being. And we have to realize we now have close to 2 million human beings incarcerated in this country. 2 million. 1 in every 4 African-American people ages 18 to 29 are in the prison system, awaiting trial, in prison, on probation afterwards. We are incarcerating people. That is what we are doing. We can slash the other programs and we're throwing them over the wall. And he was one more thrown in there. And so then the sneaky part of God, part 2, was when he sent me to visitor form, it had different, classifications of visitors. Friend, relative, spouse. And he says, hey, I'm a Catholic, you're a nun, would you be my spiritual advisor? Sure, fill in a little spiritual advisor thing, I don't know they're going to execute this guy in the electric chair on the night of April the 5th, 1984, at midnight. And at 5:45 in the evening, everybody leaves the death house but the spiritual advisor. Who's going to be me? I never dreamed they were going to kill a guy, much less that I was going to be involved, and that I'd be walking with him, and that I'd be saying to him, look at me, Pat, when they do this, look at me, and I will be the face of Christ for you. I will be the face of love for you. I don't have a clue about any of that. But the way grace works, see, our sisters have a maxim that says, never leap ahead of grace. And I got to watch, because I'm something of a leaper. But on this, I didn't leap. But as it unfolded, I was there, and it all unfolded this way. And I go visit this man, and I'm going to brush over this lightly now, because I want to spend some time telling you about the opera and the film and all that. The visit, the seeing of his humanness there behind that heavy mesh screen, knew that he did a terrible crime. I'm about to find out what it is. But boy, there was no doubt in my mind when I looked at that heavy mesh screen that I was looking into the eyes of a human being. And that experience of grace, of the transcendence of the person, of the mystery of the person, of the dignity of the person, that whoever this guy is and whatever he did, he is more than a worst act of his life. I could see the goodness in him. I could see the response in him. Sister, you came, and he had made me a little gift, out of cigarette wrappers, a little picture frame. He said, you came all this way to see me, and the 2 hours flew by. And I have received a great gift over these 15 years of visiting people in prison. And it is this, that when you go to prison to visit somebody, no distractions, let's go rent a film, let's go get a pizza. You just are in stripped-down circumstances, and all you have is each other's presence. And what a great gift that is to have. I've honed that gift over the years, just simply to be present. And when you come down to it, it's what we all desire. The presence, pure presence of each other, listening, conversing with each other. And that's what we did that day. 2 hours flew by. Next thing I know, the guard's saying, lady, time for you to leave. And I'm driving a community car home and thinking, he didn't talk about what he did. And then I think, first time I'm going to meet somebody, I'm going to have the trust to tell them the worst thing I ever did in my life? No way. And then I knew it was all going to be about trust. And that it was all going to be about accompanying him and letting it unfold as it went along. Began to visit his brother. His brother got life, he got death. That was my first question about the legal system. My daddy was a lawyer. I really never thought that anybody on death row could be innocent. I thought it would just be a fluke if that ever happened. After all, don't we have the best court system in the world? After all, don't we have this long appeals process? That would be a fluke if that happened. You get an innocent person in there along with the guilty. I never thought it could happen. His case is complicated, but you are aware that we now have 87 innocent people who have come off of death row in this country. You are aware that over 90% of the American public now knows that innocent people are going in there along with the guilty. And the reason is because when they go into trial, we don't have a full adversarial system. Because they're poor, their defense either overworked, underpaid. Louisiana, the lawyers who go in these capital trials have to scrap for every dollar they get from the Louisiana legislatures, even to get investigators or expert witnesses. So when you go in, the prosecution presents forensic evidence, presents experts, presents arguments, and often in the defense it's a wash. There's nothing there. And that's why you have the innocent people thrown in with the others. It has everything to do with the kind of defense that they get. Not that poor people sometimes don't do terrible crimes, they do. But isn't it odd that when you look at this funnel and who gets selected for death in this country, 98.6% of them are poor people? Isn't that odd? And it has everything to do with what kind of defense they have. Well, with this first man, I'm presuming he's guilty. I'm presuming all of that. And I don't know much, but I did have a question. How did one brother get life and one brother get death for the same crime? Then I go over in the Prison Coalition office after a couple of months had gone by. And I said, could I have some background information on the Saunier case? Because I didn't want to be naive. I was going to wait when he was ready to tell me. If he ever trusted me enough, that was one thing. But I didn't want to be naive. And I go into the Prison Coalition office, and they take out all these legal-looking envelopes, folders, whole stack of them, put them on a table. I open up the top of the heap, and there's a paper, the Daily Iberian, right in the middle of Acadiana in Louisiana, where Cajun people live, Lafayette, New Iberia, St. Martinville. And it's the Daily Iberian from the town of New Iberia, and there on the front page of the paper are the pictures of two teenage kids in their prom outfits. David LeBlanc, 17 years old. Loretta Bork, 18 years old. And the big headline in dark, bold print, teenagers found murdered. And then I read the article, and I read about these two brothers that I'm visiting, and how they were rabbit hunting, and how they had 22 rifles, and how these kids, after a homecoming football game on a Friday night, November 4th, 1977, went to park near the sugarcane field, and how the two brothers came up to the car, and that they had done this with other teenage couples. And said, hey, you're trespassing on people's property. We're the security guards here. Well, if the girl has sex with us, we won't report you. And the kids, all these couples, 5 other couples came forward when David and Loretta were killed and said, they did that to us, that happened to us. But they were too scared and embarrassed to come forward. But this night, it led to these 2 children are found lying face down, their faces in the wet grass and bullet holes in the backs of their heads. And I read this, and now I know what they've done. More and more I use, the image of the cross, because there are 2 arms on this cross. I've already met Patrick Saunier on death row, know his humanness, know his dignity. But now there's this other arm, the victims. And there's no way you can even hear about this. Read it, however we get the news about these murders, where we experience in ourselves this deep, deep outrage, which is part of our moral sensibility. Because if we're not outraged when we hear about the death of innocent people, it means we get numb, it means we get coarsened. And I felt that outrage, still feel that outrage, that these 2 innocent kids after a football game, and they are ripped out of life, ripped out by this act. And there they are, their bodies lying down there. Every parent's worst nightmare. And this is where I made my big mistake. Because I think of the parents, and I think, I ought to go see those parents. And then I think, man, those parents are going to be angry. They probably want the death penalty. What if they say to me, sister, we're going to sit on the front row. We want to see justice for our child. Can you support that? And what would I say? I couldn't say I'm for the death penalty. I'm hanging on by my fingernails of principle. And that's why we experience such deep ambivalence on this issue, because emotionally we're outraged. There's another part of our souls, though, that knows the gospel of Jesus is not about this. And even principles of justice, we know we shouldn't be about it. But we feel this big tension in our souls over it, this cross that we crawl up on this. And we're stretched, and it challenges us. And, of course, our culture says, you got to choose one side or the other. You're going to be on the side of that one? You don't want him to be executed? Well, you're against the victims' families. If you want to be with the victims' families, you can't be for him. And that's where spirituality comes in. That we descend to a depth below those polarities, or in the dignity of life, where you say, yeah, I can be for both. Now, it's a journey for me to get to both. I started out with the death row inmates. And then when I think about going to see those parents, I'm scared, and I don't go, and I stay away. And it was the worst mistake I ever made in my life, because I met them at the worst possible time you could meet a victim's family, which is at the pardon board hearing, which is public, where when you come in Louisiana, you got to sign the book which side you on. Are you on the side of the state and you want to see the execution proceed? Or are you on the side of the defendant and you're coming to ask clemency for the execution not to proceed? There's no middle ground when you go into the pardon board here. And I go to that pardon board here. Me with one lawyer and one psychiatrist were the only ones in the room to speak for Patrick Saunier that he not die. And see, what happens is all this gets tied into justice for the victim's family. So all the other people sitting in there are with the victim's family who've been offered this now. Look, we're going to do something for your dead child. We're going to give you justice, and what we're going to give you is the ultimate penalty, and we're going to execute this guy that killed your child. And it's a way to show you how much we respect your child. The culture's tied into this thing, legitimizing this, just like that movie from Tim Robbins, the cowboy movie. We're legitimizing the vengeance. We're calling it honorable, and we're calling it justice. You never hear a politician say we're going to have a little vengeance here. Say we're going to have justice here. That's what you hear them saying. The meeting was over. The pardon board was voting. We were walking outside, and that's when I met him personally the first time. The Bourke family, whose daughter had been killed. And you got to know, everybody's Catholic in this whole scenario. The Bourke family, whose daughter was killed, the LeBlancs, whose son was killed, Patrick Saunier, Eddie Saunier, Mrs. Saunier, the nun, everybody's Catholic. And the Bourques just walked past me. They didn't even speak to me. They were just so angry. And right behind them is coming Lloyd LeBlanc and his wife Eula. And I'm bracing myself like, they are going to be so angry. And I was really going on the assumption that every victim's family must be for the death penalty. And up they come. And Lloyd LeBlanc says, Sister, I'm Lloyd LeBlanc. And this is my wife, Eula. It's our son, David, who was killed. He said, Sister, where you been? Where you been? We haven't had anybody to talk to. You can't believe the pressure on us with this death penalty thing. And he had just been the one to speak for the victims' families, because Godfrey Bourke had said, look, when we talked before that pardon board, I'm too emotional. Lord, you got to talk for both the families, and you got to tell them what we want. And sure enough, he had stood up. What do the victims' families want? We want the execution to proceed. And now he's looking into my eyes, and he's saying, Sister, where have you been? Because we haven't had anybody to talk to, and you can't believe the pressure on us. I was so wrong. And lame. I said, oh, Miss LeBlanc, I'm sorry. I didn't think you wanted to see me. And he's real Cajun, Frenchy. He goes, me, sister? But sister, you don't know what I think unless you're going to come talk to me. You're going to find out what I think. And I want to say, you don't know what a coward I am. And I had a good editor when I wrote Dead Man Walking. Jason Epstein was my editor. First draft, I kind of played this all down a little bit, that I was confused, had never done this before. And he says to me, Helen, it was cowardice, wasn't it? I mean, you were scared, weren't you? And I go, yeah. He said, look, when you write your book, write about your mistakes. And don't just take people with you on the peaks of all the waves when you do things great. Take them with you through the mistakes. Well, this was a big mistake. I didn't reach out to those families. And Lloyd LeBlanc, because of the grace in him, not me, he's the hero of Dead Man Walking. The hero. I gave a talk 2 weeks ago in a little gym in Thibodaux, Louisiana, close to where he lives. And lo and behold, he's sitting there in the audience. So when I told the Lloyd LeBlanc story, and when I talked about him being the hero of the book, everybody in that room stood up and applauded this man. He takes me by the hand. He tells me he prays in this little chapel. And I say, oh, well, Lloyd, I'll come pray with you. You get sucked into it. You say you're going to do it. And then I said, what time you pray? He says, 4 to 5 in the morning. I said, the beauty is, have you ever made a pilgrimage at night? And then you drive across the Atchafalaya Swamp to go to St. Martinville. You got to leave at 2:30 in the morning to get there for 4 to go and pray with somebody who has been hurt so badly in their life. It's a beautiful, prayerful experience, which I always look forward to. Sure, it means getting up early. Sure, you're tired the next day. And then to kneel by this man and to hear him pray. And I realized I'm in the presence of somebody who got thrown into this fire. Because everybody says, yeah, well, if it ever happened to my child, I know I'd want to see that SOB fry or whatever. I know. And here's this man who's making his way down this road to do what Jesus said to do. And so before we say the rosary, the sorrowful mysteries of the rosary on a Friday, he prays for everybody. He prays for David, that David will be at peace with God. He prays for his wife, Eula, who cried for 3 years. He says, my wife cried a river of tears. He prays for the Bourke family. Then he prays for Patrick Saunier, and he prays for Eddie Saunier, and he prays for Mrs. Saunier. He prays for everybody. And later he told me, he said, sister, Jesus told us to forgive. He said, I didn't feel it when they called him to go to the morgue to identify David's body. I only gradually see these little stories eked out about him and who he really was. And there they pulled his son out on that tray in the morgue. The prayer that rose to Lloyd LeBlanc's lips was a prayer he had learned from his mother and father and from the Christian brothers where he went to school and the sisters. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. And when he comes to the words in the Our Father, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us, he said the words. He said, sister, I didn't feel them. But Jesus asked us to forgive, and he set his face to go down that road, and the grace of God met him on our road. I've met incredible human beings across this country. In the letter to the Hebrews, it talks about a cloud of witnesses. I met a cloud of witnesses who don't go down the road of vengeance, but do what Jesus said to do. Set their faces and go down the road, and who do it. Mrs. Saunier in the town couldn't even go into the grocery store because all the anger and hatred and rage heaped on her sons are heaped on her. People are cutting up dead cats, throwing them on her front porch. She disconnects her phone. She turns off her TV. She doesn't go in the store anymore because she overhears people saying loud enough for her, there's that white trash mama. Raise those white trash kids. They're the ones that killed that Bourke girl and that LeBlanc boy. So she became like a little recluse. And one afternoon, her doorbell rings. She goes to the front door. And standing at the front door is Lloyd LeBlanc with a basket of fruit. He said, Miss Saunier, can I come in? She lets him in. He said, I just want to bring you this fruit and just want to say to you that as parents, we never really know what our kids might do. I don't hold you responsible for what your boys did. That's Lloyd LeBlanc. And he's the first one that began to take me down that trail of tears with the victims' families. And I keep thinking of the image of the cross. And I know that Jesus were here today in the flesh, would have one arm around that death row inmate saying, I know he did a terrible crime, or she. We have over 50 women on death row. But she, too, is my beloved daughter, my beloved son, and the victim's family. And here's the thing I'm going to learn when I start going to the victim's family support groups, is how alone they are. Everybody was leaving them alone. I should have known from my own mistake. But people are saying things like, after the funeral, nobody came to see us. Or I try to talk about my daughter, people change the subject because they don't want to. They say, well, Marilyn, shouldn't you be past that by now? They don't know how to deal with our pain, so they stay away from us. I realize victims' families are pariahs on one end of this, and death row inmates are pariahs on the other end. The beauty of being church, the beauty of following the gospel of Jesus, is that we can be on both sides. Victims' family need the arms of the community around them. So the bishop in Lafayette, where these murders happened, Lloyd LeBlanc sent him a letter. He said, how come we see people with the death row inmates, but you never see any people with the church with the victims' families? And the bishop that year began on the second Sunday of Advent. And the bishop says the Mass, which is a way of saying you're important to us and your pain's important, every second Sunday of Advent. And they still do this. A Mass for victims of violence. And people pour into that church. And they don't have to say how they experience violence. If it was murder or if it was incest or if it was abuse, domestic abuse or whatever. And victims' families need the arms of the community, and we can't abandon them. And so it calls in me what happened going to these meetings. I knew I couldn't do everything, but I could do one thing. And the one thing I did was start Survive in New Orleans. We got a Mennonite volunteer. We cobbled together a little money, got somebody to give us a room and a telephone, and we began Survive for murder victims' families so people could gather together. Just to have accompaniment to be able to say in a safe situation, vent their anger at God, their anger at everybody, their guilt, and to be able to even say out loud the terrible details of what had happened to their child till finally they can get it out and finally they can be healed. What the state offers is, oh, we're going to heal you. We're going to offer you the execution of the person who killed your child. And we have to ask ourselves a question about that. Can that heal a human heart to watch another human being die? I was just at the memorial in Oklahoma City, was there several weeks ago. They have the memorial built now for the 168 people killed in the bombing. And you know what the sculpture is? 168 empty chairs. The little children's chairs are small, the adults are big. Empty chairs. Because when we're taken, nothing could replace us, because God's made us that way, unique and irreplaceable. And in Dead Man Walking, I tell both stories. I tell the story of Lloyd LeBlanc, but I also tell the story of another family. Their daughter had been brutally killed, and they couldn't wait to see Robert Willie, one of the murderers, die. Had their own press conference a week before the execution, waiting for the execution, waiting for it to come. Vernon Harvey, the stepfather, saying, I wish they'd let me pull the switch. I'd like to see the smoke fly off his body. And then they do. They witness the execution, and all the press is waiting for him when he came out in the parking lot of the prison there at Angola. And to hear them then, to hear Vernon Harvey say, anybody got any whiskey? Anybody want to dance? We got the SOB tonight. And then to add, do you know what? He died too quick. I hope he burns in hell. And then to see this couple go to every execution with their aluminum folding chairs and their two signs, justice for victims, another murderer getting their due. And they couldn't break out of it. Because partly why, I think, is because they've gone public in their support of the death penalty. If they would ever retract that, it might look like they're betraying their daughter who was killed. How do they get out from under that once they publicly? I mean, and you look at the pressure that's involved with the death penalty. Not just victims' families doing this. District attorneys. Once they lay down that gauntlet that they're going to go for the death penalty, how do they get out of it? These 87 innocent people that have come off a death row, and you'll see it on 48 Hours, or you'll see it on 60 Minutes, or you'll see it on 2020. It's clear the person was innocent, and they go and they're interviewing the DAs. They're sticking by their story. They're sticking by it, saying, I know it says that. I really believe we did the right thing. That person was guilty. How are they in front of God and everybody and the whole public going to say we made a mistake? And juries get involved with this. We ask people to be God. We ask people to go behind closed doors. Now, look, we're going to give you the facts, both sides. Of course, they don't always get them on both sides because of the poor system. And then you go in, you make a decision. We had a case in Louisiana where recently a jury, it was like on retrial for the fourth time. A man had not only killed one person, but he had shot and he had killed 3 people and is reloading to kill a 4th person. Now, it sure looks like he should get the death penalty, doesn't it? And here's this jury, asked to be God, and then they heard the mitigating circumstances of this person's life, who had been abused from the time he was a little boy, aged 1, with his daddy slapping him around. He had sustained head injuries. He had nothing but abuse his whole life, and one day he exploded in violence. Now, that jury is supposed to go look at the heinousness, the terribleness of the crime, look at the mitigation of here we have an abused human being his whole life. His mother tried to get mental health for him. They turned him down. The state did nothing for him. Then he explodes in violence, and now he's supposed to be killed. And what's that jury going to do? Who has that wisdom to weigh that kind of mitigation over that kind of crime and to be able to say you should live or you should die? Who has that? And all these 87 innocent people coming off a death row, like Anthony Porter in Illinois, 2 days away from execution, that jury in good faith voted him as guilty and for him to die. And he had journalism students in 2 weeks go in and do an investigation that the defense had never done and cracked open the whole case, got the real murderer to confess, and Anthony Porter's reunited with his family. I keep thinking of the jurors.
Imagine when they read that in the paper about this man, Anthony Porter. They had all condemned him to death. There is no way we can do this thing. We just aren't godlike enough to do it. Even if we wanted to do it, we couldn't set up a system. And then race comes into the death penalty. And you know where you really see it? Is who's a victim. The 3,600 plus people sitting on death row tonight are there because 8 out of every 10 are there because they killed white people. When people of color are killed, you think there's the same outrage over the death of a black inner city kid or what happened at Columbine? There've been drive-by shootings in this city for how many years? You never heard that on the big splash in the media. But Columbine, we all know, but those were white kids. You can't take race out of this thing. And it works both ways. Who the victim is and who cares about the victim and who's outraged. And it's not because we get up in the morning, throw our legs over the side of the bed and say, let's go do something racist. It's because the judges are white, the prosecutors, over 90% of white, juries are white. People tend to identify with folks like them. That's the way it works. You also see race on the other side, that a disproportionate number of people of color are sentenced and given much longer sentences than white people who do the same crimes. They just did this in Philadelphia. We're not talking about Yazoo, Mississippi. We're talking about Philadelphia. Dave Baldus, who's done some of the most extensive race studies, showed that a black person and a white person doing the same crime, same parallel background, black people will get 4 times the amount of punishment for the same crime. So how are we going to do this thing called death right? And even when you go to make your list, who deserves to die for what crime? New Hampshire has the most restricted death penalty if you kill a policeman. Well, guess what happened in New Hampshire? A child was killed. So somebody comes forward in the New Hampshire legislature and says, well, if we have the death for a policeman, we ought to have it for a child. And then the list starts growing. Well, if we have it for a child, then we ought to have it for more than one person killed. So by the time you get to the anti-crime program of the Congress, they expanded the death penalty to 50 crimes, including federal poultry inspector. Now, how did the federal poultry inspector get in there? You may ask. And I'm going to tell you, the federal poultry inspector got in there real easy because people get political points for punishing criminals, and somebody had a constituent who either inspected turkeys or chickens or something and got killed. And he puts it in the crime bill. And it gets to be crazy. But that's what we have. Now we have the federal death penalty. We have 19 people sentenced. Janet Reno, 3 weeks ago, called for a study of it because out of the 19 people condemned to death in the federal death penalty, 16 are people of color. Plus, 48% of them came from certain judicial districts. She said, we got to study this. She didn't go the further route that Governor George Ryan did, which is to declare a moratorium on executions while they do it. But that's under study, too. And me, the victim's family, then this man, Patrick Saunier, to get his whole story, it's all in the book. But I ended up walking with that man to his death. I ended up being with him in this death house. It's funny. The guards call it Camp F. The death row inmates call it the death house. It's a special house constructed with the execution chamber in it, which you have here in Indiana, not too far from you, and in Terre Haute, the federal, to get ready to do the first execution here too. It was the most surreal experience of my life. I mean, I'm a life person. My mother and father were wonderful. They loved us, and they were full of life, and I'm full of life. And to be in this place where you're waiting with this man, and you know at this time they're going to kill him. And it's not like you're visiting somebody in the hospital who's like dying of cancer, or where you see them fading and their faculties are fading. They're alive. He's drinking black coffee and he's drinking cigarettes and he's talking to me the way I'm talking to you right now. He's fully alive. And all you know is with your mind that at midnight they're going to kill him, and you're counting off the days. This is his last Wednesday alive. This is his last Thursday alive. It's why you can't take the torture out of the death penalty. Because human beings, conscious human beings with imaginations, condemned to death, anticipate death, imagine it, and die 1,000 times before we die. Torture's built in to the death penalty, no matter what the method at the end. So they walk in the room to give you a lethal injection. So you say, well, that's not torture. What about the mind of the person inside? All the people on death row I've ever known always have the same nightmare. Ooh, the guards are coming for me. Tonight's my night. They're coming to get me. They're dragging me out of my cell. I'm yelling, no, no. And then I wake up. I'm in a sweat. Oh, it's a dream. They weren't coming for me. And not only that, but they're watching their mother. They're watching their family come and see them and accompany them in sorrow and are helpless to help them. They watch that sorrow. Is this the only road we know to go down? And then with this man, the warden coming, and Pat had said to me, look, Sister Helen, 2.5 years. He truly was remorseful for what he had done. A lot of times people ask me, are they remorseful? Are they at least remorseful? Does the death penalty help people be remorseful? Death penalty doesn't help people be remorseful. Self-preservation can kick in, especially people who've had tough lives. Like Robert Willie, death penalty, said electric chair don't bother me, man. And he actually walked to the electric chair with this little strut, with this little bounce in his step that he had. It made him even more macho. Because for remorse to happen, the human heart has to be moved by love to be able to enter into the pain of another human being and to say, I'm sorry for that. Threat of death by the state does not necessarily change the human heart. Love changes the human heart. Presence changes the human heart. But for Patrick Sonnier, and I have his Bible, and the Psalms underlined like Psalm 31, oh God, you are my rock, on you I take my stand. He truly had gone through the sorrow for what had happened. And to get the whole story, you can read the book. But the truth was Eddie was the one who killed the teenage kids. He was volatile. He was emotional. He had that gun in his hand, and he shot him and he killed him. And Pat died. And there's another story. One brother lived, one brother died. And how did that brother not go crazy when his brother was executed? How did he not? I'd follow up with Eddie. He's like a brother. I visit him. And he's in prison. He's never going to get out. And he works in a welding shop. And he's not volatile anymore. He's learned self-control in the prison. And he's begun to do loving acts for the other prisoners, like older people that they call pops in the dorm. And he'll share with them when he gets something from the canteen, from the store. Ways that you can see that he's developing as a human being. And Pat had said to me, though, when it started getting close, look, sister, you can't be there at the end because it's going to be, it was electrocution. He said it could scar you to watch this. And he was trying to protect me, of course. And I said to him, Pat, look, Pat, there is no way you're going to die alone. Some people say to me, ooh, you have such courage. When grace buoys us up to do something, you don't experience it as courage. You experience it that you absolutely, and that's what I said to him, Pat, there is no way you're going to die alone. I will be the face of Christ for you, the face of love. You look at me, Pat. You look at me when they do this. And that's what happened. And I walked with him, read to him from Isaiah 43. Sure enough, and they're strapping him in, and he's finding my face with the witnesses, and I put out my hand like this, stood up for him to see me. And I carry his face inside of me, and the face of 4 other human beings who were put to death in front of my eyes. And when I came out of the execution chamber that night, I didn't know what I was going to do. We don't even know how it changed. I compare it to baptism and some kind of indelible mark made on your soul. You don't even know the changes that have happened inside of you. All I knew was, and I was very clear about this, I had been a witness. And so it was my job to get out and start telling the story, because people are good and decent people, and they're not going to keep saying yes to this. If somebody could bring them there, and if somebody could tell them what they knew about the death penalty, they would choose the alternative. And that was the night of April 5th, 1984. And I've been doing it ever since. Not because I'm brave, not because I'm heroic, but because the fidelity demands it, integrity demands it. I've been there, I've been the witness. And now across this country, I have crisscrossed this country. I have traveled much more than any politician running for any office ever traveled. To audiences, to people in universities, in schools, in churches, especially little church groups, peace and justice groups in the parish, and they invite other people in the city to come hear about the death penalty. And I've learned how to take people through the journey, learned how to do it. And I'll tell you what gives me hope? People respond. It's not like they're wedded to the death penalty. And important for people to know that there is an alternative. Because sometimes people say, oh, well, I saw this on 2020, a Parade magazine, a Reader's Digest. This murderer, and they got out and he killed again. The only way we can be safe is if we kill these people. We got to do that to be safe. And people need to know that over the last 10 years, state legislatures all over this country have tightened up sentencing for first-degree felony murder, and people are not walking out of prison in a few short years. States either have life without parole or they have mandatory long-term imprisonment for people who are sentenced under that. And we need to know that, because that's an argument of safety. That's not an argument of vengeance. And that's part of the whole educational thing. Just a little bit about Catholic teaching. There's a man by the name of Joseph Odell in Virginia. This is 1997. One day the phone rings. A young woman by the name of Laurie Urs, who started working with one of the Innocence Projects, called me up. Said, sister, there's this man, Joseph Odell in Virginia. They're getting ready to execute him. He's asking for a DNA test which would prove his innocence. They won't let him have the DNA test. Would you come to Richmond and do a press conference? Because, you were Susan Sarandon in a movie. And, well, we think the press will come if you come. And so I begin to experience the celebrity status as servanthood, because you get called to do things just because people know about you. So I'll say, yeah, I'll come. Do the press conference in Richmond. Try to call attention to Joseph's case, to try to put some pressure on the governor. Italy gets involved in Joseph Odell. Now, I don't know what it is about Italy, but you got to know this. It's the pasta, it's the faith, it's the combination of the pasta and the faith. But members of the Italian parliament saw about the Joseph Odell case. They sent over a delegation to go meet with Joseph Odell, to go meet with the governor. The mayor of Palermo comes over to meet Joseph Odell. And the prison is nervous because he took on the mafia. So they go, here comes this Italian mayor connected with the mafia coming to see the guy on death row. I mean, when Joseph was executed, it was security like you couldn't believe. Helicopters circling the prison, guards, because they thought they might try to have the mafia come take Joseph out. I mean, they think security. They exaggerate a little bit sometimes, but they think security. Italy starts getting involved in the case of Joseph Odell. People are protesting in St. Peter's Square. Free Joseph Odell. Give him the DNA test. The Pope says, who's Joseph Odell? They say, well, so they bring the Pope through it. The Pope gets involved. The Pope calls the governor of Virginia. Mother Teresa gets involved. She calls the governor of Virginia. Plus, she sent a note to Scalia through his parish priest. And Mother Teresa deals with you when she wants to tell you something. Like, what are you doing making these decisions about this man? Everybody's getting involved with Joseph Odell. Well, the tragedy is that when nothing works. I mean, and the governor of Virginia is saying, man, I'm getting out. He got 10,000 telegrams, faxes, messages, calls from Italy. 10,000. Including the Pope and Mother Teresa. And he goes, they're not my constituents. They don't vote. He flicked them all off. And the execution of Joseph Odell proceeded. The mayor of Palermo had told Joseph, if they kill you, we're going to ship your body to Palermo. We're going to make you an honorary citizen. We're going to bury you in Palermo. So it ends up that we're moving to the execution. Before that happened, though, the Italian parliament invites Laurie Urs, this young woman who's now gone through law school, is a defender of human rights for her clients, to come to Italy to give talks. And so she called me and she said, Helen, I'm going to see the Pope. It would be a chance for you to see the Pope. Why don't you come with me? But I had a friend who was dying of breast cancer, and I knew I couldn't go. She said, well, look, write a letter. Well, for 14 years, I've been wanting to write a letter to the Pope about the death penalty, because I was working with it closely. And I knew if I could ever just have a chance to talk to him, because, he visited the United States 4 other times before he came to St. Louis. Never mentioned death penalty. Whenever the pro-life issues were out there, death penalty was never there. Traditional teaching of the church was to uphold the right of the state to take life. Then things started moving in the other direction. In the encyclical, The Gospel of Life, the Pope pushed the death penalty to the very edge, said it ought to be rare if not non-existent. Modern societies have alternatives through incarceration, but he left a great big old loophole in that encyclical, which was, in cases of absolute necessity, the state can execute. So you have the encyclical, you have the catechism, which in section 2266 upheld the criteria which said for grave or grievous crimes the state could execute, which is a criteria used by anybody, any legislature that's in favor of the death penalty. So we were solidly in there on the side of upholding the death penalty. And I said, Dear Holy Father, I've accompanied 5 people to their death, and in your encyclical The Gospel of Life, you upheld the dignity of life. But Your Holiness, how can we uphold the dignity of people who are being tortured and being led to their death? How can we say we are upholding their dignity? No matter what crime they have done to torture a human being and then to kill them, most of them have said to me, Sister, pray that God holds up my legs. And then I said, your encyclical was great because then you moved us to an alternative, but you left this great big old loophole. And luckily, providentially, the BBC was doing a story, and they interviewed the Catholic District Attorney Harry Connick Sr. in New Orleans, who goes for the death penalty every chance he gets. It's his son that does the nice music. Well, this is the daddy. And the BBC interviewed him and asked him about the Pope's encyclical, and he quoted that part. He said, yeah, but look what the Pope says, in cases of absolute necessity, and we can't get enough death penalties now. He said every time we get one, it's absolute necessity, and I was able to put that right in the Pope's lap. I said, look, your words are being quoted for death. We have to change the criteria to get it on a solid base. And I said, Your Holiness, a lot of people I meet who say they're pro-life, they mean they're pro-innocent life, but they're not pro-guilty life. And there has been that distinguishing thing done. Well, yeah, but those that are guilty, they've stepped beyond the pale, and the same things don't apply to them, so we can execute them. But now innocent people, old people, unborn children, that's innocence. It is. It's innocence. There is a difference. Well, the catechism was changed after that. And it was changed in a significant way because they took out the criteria of grievous or grave crime. So it does not matter what crime a person does, and to uphold their dignity, and that the state should not execute them. And it was after the catechism was changed, and then the Pope came to St. Louis, and for the first time then, we hear him put the death penalty in with the other pro-life issues. Now, people in the parishes and people sitting in the pews all need to be brought on this journey. It's not like we can just announce to people, the Pope in St. Louis who said no to the death penalty. There's a journey of the heart and the soul involved on the death penalty, which we all must go on. Let me just take you into the opera, the film, and the play that Tim Robbins is doing, because it's a way to also help people reflect on this. The movie was done first. That was done in close collaboration with Tim Robbins and Susan Sarandon. Susan Sarandon made the film happen. She read the book first. She pestered Tim for 6 months until he read the book. He read the book. I met with him. He said this would make a good film. All the Hollywood studios turned down the script. They didn't think it could ever be a box office success where you're going to take an American audience without a lot of violence and without a lot of action and a lot of sex, and you're going to help them reflect on the spiritual theme of redemption. They said, Tim, it's downer. Tim, it's downer. You got a nun in it. We got no romantic element unless you'd let us spice it up, which they were all too keen to do, which is exactly why people say, how'd you let Hollywood do the movie? I said, Hollywood didn't do the movie. Susan Sarandon did the movie. Tim said, but it has a story of redemption in it. They said, Tim, he's going to be executed in the end. The guy did a terrible crime. Nobody's going to want to see this film. Well, we all know what happened. The film came out. People stood in long lines in the snow to see it. Susan was nominated for the Academy Award, received it on the Feast of the Annunciation, March the 25th, 1996, with 1.3 billion people in the world watching, and the film was given over to the world. You know, I always wondered, Jesus was saying, preach the gospel to every nation. There's a dynamic in the gospel that moves it out to the world. And that's definitely happened with this. Of all issues, the death penalty. When I'm starting this, people going, Helen, that's so controversial and emotional. People never going to be able to be persuaded on this. And so the film's out there, and the film is not a polemic against the death penalty. You know who was most disappointed in the film? The criminal defense lawyers. They wanted all arguments in there about how racist it was and unfair. But all it does is it takes people over to both arms of the cross. It takes them over to the victim's side, takes them to the death row side, and then at the end you see the execution. You see victims' families complex. One victim's family's for vengeance, the other, Earl Delacroix, whose name means cross. You see him trying to get out from under the rock of the vengeance. The opera. A man by the name of Lotfi Mansouri is the director of the opera in San Francisco. He likes to do the classic things, but he says we need to have a modern opera. He calls together Terrence McNally and a young composer by the name of Jake Hagee, puts them in a room together, says, why don't y'all see if y'all can come up with an opera? Well, they meet, they don't come up with an opera, and they couldn't agree. Jake suggested something light. Terrence didn't like it. They part. This is kind of like, I guess, like in vitro fertilization. He gave them some time, then he brings them together again. And he said, talk about an opera. And they do. And Terrence McNally has Dead Man Walking. And they clicked. And it took them 2 years, and it opened the other night. Now, I don't go to operas much. The journalists, there are 90 journalists from all over the world came to this opera. And so they were interviewing me saying, Sister, do you like the opera? And I go, well, I've been to 3. I went to Aida, La Boheme, and Dead Man Walking. This is my 3rd opera, which is not a whole lot of opera going. But you had to be there. The audience was 3,248 people. It was packed. There were people standing in the doorways. And I'm going, can they get it? Can they get it? I mean, I'd seen the libretto. I knew it had, I said, as long as you have the story of redemption in it, I trust you guys to do this. And it opens with the crime. The prologue is the crime, and you see everybody's a witness, watches 2 teenagers get killed, innocent kids. So everybody starts out with the outrage. Because we've all witnessed this, the killing of 2 innocent people. We know who did it, and his name is Joe DeRoche. We know who did it, and he's hard, and he's tough. And then you see me coming in. Susan Graham plays me, a mezzo. Normally mezzos don't play the lead roles, but Jake was saying, with all your struggles between the victims' families, we didn't think it called for somebody knocking off high C's. So as a mezzo, she got to play the lead role. She says, normally I'm a prostitute and things, because you got a lower voice. It's interesting because it's like we code voices. You know how the good guys used to wear the white hats and the bad guys, Well, they do that with voices. High voices, good people. Low voices, bad people. In opera. So here you got a mezzo. She's me. And my whole theme in it is my journey, just like I'm talking to you tonight. But what happens is, then you see me going visiting the guy on death row, and he's tough. And God, the way they do the sets is so powerful. Going into the prison, silhouettes, lights. And then the turning point comes. Now, the biggest opera star is Frederica von Stade. I don't know if you've ever heard of her. She was given first choice of all the roles. She didn't choose to be the nun. She chose to be the mother of the death row inmate. And so everybody's on this journey, outraged about this guy, seeing that he's hard as nails, he's not changing, he's not remorseful, and you come to the pardon board hearing, and Frederica von Stade, as the mother of this man, appeals to the pardon board for her son. And she goes up, she has a little purse, has little spandex pants, little blouse, comes up, and I've witnessed this. This is what brought me to tears in the opera. I have watched these mothers come before pardon boards to plead for their children, and you know that pardon board is no more listening to them than flying the moon. They already got their marching orders from the governor. You know they're going to condemn them to death. And she captured this. She goes up and she goes, do I talk here? Do I talk? And she opens up her purse and pulls out her notes. and begins to sing about her son, Joey. who did this terrible thing. And she said, I know if it had happened to my child, I would probably feel like you, but don't kill my Joe. And she begins to sing then, haven't we all suffered enough? Haven't we all suffered enough? And you could feel the audience. It's just like, oh my God, there's another victim's family here. Now this other little family comes onto the stage. And in the last scene, when she visits him with the two other sons, they say, Sister Helen, take a picture of us. And so the Sister Helen character clicks this camera, and when the flash goes off, for a moment, a light comes and bathes this little family in light who just stands there. And then they take leave. And then they take you through, well, of course, the victim's family going through there, kind of like in the film complex, one all for vengeance, one trying to make his way out. And then the whole audience witnesses the execution. And if you've ever seen a gurney is shaped like a crucifix. It's a cruciform position like this. And they put him on the gurney, and he's crying. I mean, he really is crying. I mean, he's sobbing. He's sobbing and singing at the same time. I mean, it was tremendous acting. John Packard, who did this. And they lift him up before the whole crowd, and he says his last words. He asks for forgiveness. And then they put him down, and there's a minute and a half of silence in the opera. All you hear is the machine going, everybody else is away, and you watch him die. One woman was sitting next to a man, he began to cry. I mean, people were brought so close to this thing. And they had been through the crime, they knew the outrage, they knew what he had done, but then they're going to watch a human being put to death in front of their eyes. And one woman said, this man next to me was crying so hard. It's like I was holding his arm. I was giving him a Kleenex, because he was sobbing. And then you see Sister Helen coming. There he is on the gurney, dead. And she sings a spiritual that had begun with the children in St. Thomas at the beginning of the opera. God will gather us around, all around, mothers and fathers, sisters and brothers. The curtain came down. And the audience exploded. It's like they exploded. They stood up and they clapped and they cheered, and nobody left. Nobody was going out to try to get the taxi cab. They had a live reporter from the TV station and to get people as they're coming out of the opera. And the TV reporter saying, I never saw anything like this before. He said, they got it in this opera because it's such a deep human, look at all that's in this. Love or hate, life or death, compassion or vengeance. The whole human journey is in this story. And so the opera was given to the world last October the 7th. It will run in San Francisco for 8 performances. And what happens is other opera companies come and then they sign on to it. The play of Dead Man Walking, Tim Robbins, his first love actually is theater before it was even films. And I sent him an article from the New Yorker. I said, Tim, look at this. Death of a Salesman has been performed 1 million times in the world. Every day of the year, somewhere in the world, Death of a Salesman's being performed. I said, Tim, imagine if we had the play of Dead Man Walking. It could be done in universities and little theaters. It could be done all over. Wherever it'll be done, it'll bring people to reflection. Because we can't change this thing without reflection, without change of consciousness. Well, it took him 2 years, but this summer he wrote it, and he's sending it to me. Did any of you see his film, The Cradle Will Rock? It's about a musical from the 30s, which was a WPA project. These were projects during the Depression to help people get work, and so they supported plays and actors. And Tim is going to use that model for the play, which was that when the play opened in New York, it simultaneously opened all across the country in every state. So what he's doing is beginning to get a list of all the regional theater directors in every state. And I'm going to put Notre Dame University right in there, so that when the play is ready to go, it can be performed all over. And so I hope it comes here, and I hope you can perform it here. So we have 3 forms there: film, opera, which not a lot of people will go to the opera, but and then the play, which can make it accessible. I'm going to stop here. I know I've talked kind of long. How we doing, Peg?
We're doing fine. Sister Helen has graciously consented to answer questions for a little while. Also, when you leave here and Sister leaves here, she's also graciously agreed to autograph any books that you want. So we've set up in the room across the hall a place where you can purchase Dead Man Walking if you want to purchase it. And Sister will sit at a table and she'll sign until her arm falls off or you leave. I'm not sure which will occur first. In addition, those of you who have been at the conference know that you have a petition regarding the death penalty in your folders. If Sister sent those along for you to take a look at and sign if you wish. For those of you who are not at the conference but are guests here tonight, those petitions are available to you at the registration desk. Let me turn it back to Sister, and Sister will be glad to take your questions for a little while.
Those petitions are calling for a moratorium on the death penalty. And so the students here especially, if you want to take blank ones to get other people to sign, or anybody here for that matter, moratorium says let's stop the killing while we take a look and see if this is the road we want to go down. We know the answer to that. But just to stop the killing would be a graceful way to get out from under the death penalty, kind of like the ceasefire in a war. I also want to put it out there that we had Susan Sarandon and Susan Graham, who was me in the opera, and me sign some books. If anybody knows anybody that is a person of means and has $100 and wants to get one of those books, it's a way of doing fundraising for the moratorium campaign with the 3 nuns in it. And deep down in your heart, you wanted a book signed by the 3 nuns, right? Would you like to ask a question or make a comment?
I'd like to make several comments, if I may. Thank you. The case, all right. My background before I started teaching was criminal justice research in Washington, D.C. and Baltimore. I've worked with the poor. I've been with death row inmates. I've sat with these people. And so I understand something of what you're saying. I played cards with a murderer rapist.
It's more than I've done. What's your take on the death penalty?
Well, I couldn't trump him. But I just want to say that in response to some of the things you said, I think there's some sort of response that's deserving. You mentioned, and first of all, let me say, Hollywood and stage do not address the morality of the issue. Okay? So as moving as the presentation was tonight, I would hope that at least we can have dialogue. I don't mean right now.
Wait, have you seen the film?
I have not. No. But I would just say that Susan Sarandon and Susan Green notwithstanding, that's not the basis for moral reasoning. Emphasis on the poor, you said Jesus inaugurated a new community with justice. Jesus did not necessarily negate the state's responsibility in keeping order. And in Deuteronomy it says to not discriminate both against rich and poor. So I think we have to be impartial in that regard. You mentioned that you were a child of privilege, sister. That doesn't address the morality of capital crimes, though. You said in your heart a fire for justice exists. The church's historical teaching has been, and the church has acknowledged up to about 1955, commutative, distributive, and retributive justice. The fathers are very clear on that. In terms of offenders being victims, that still doesn't address the moral issue and the distinction between crime and wrongdoing and victimhood. You said we want to be able to execute children under 18, and those were your words. That was overstating it. As one who
said who committed a crime when they were below 18.
You said we want to be able to execute children under 18 as the follow-up to that. And I think that's not a fully responsible statement. As a Christian who has worked in public policy, that doesn't do justice.
You think we should execute people who do crimes when they're younger than 18? Can you answer the question?
No, I'm simply saying that was that was rhetorical flourish that doesn't deal with the morality of the
Would
issue.
you answer the question, do you want to execute people who have done crimes when they are younger than 18?
No, I do not want to, but what I want is not the issue. That's all I'm just saying. I'm trying to separate emotion from moral reasoning.
Well, may I just ask how much longer you're going to go? Are you doing a whole short course here?
Well,
Because there are other people I want to respond to, and I'll be glad to follow up with you, but, I mean, if you're going to do a point-by-point thing of the whole talk, I don't know if we have time for that.
Okay.
And I'd like to just kind of respond to a couple of things you're saying, because
I'll
you're going
defer.
through a whole course here.
I will defer to the chair tonight.
Thank you for your comment, and Sister has graciously agreed to examine it point by point with you. And I think we need to give other people the opportunity to talk, or I think we need to adjourn to the other room. I think it's clear that there's development in church doctrine, and I think we clearly have an instance of that. I could defer to Judge Noonan, who spoke to this at the end of his presentation. But clearly there's been a development in church doctrine, and there has been a moral defense of a change of a point of view that we've seen in a culture that is more sensitive to life, whether that life be innocent life or whether that life be guilty life. And I think the Holy Father also focuses on, and this has been a central part of his teaching, the notion that the things that we do create us to be the people that we are. So from the perspective of an ethics of virtue, which has been so central to the writings of the Holy Father, it means something when we, the people of the state, whatever the state is, when we execute someone, when we choose killing as a way to solve human problems.
Thank you.
Good evening, yeah.
Good evening.
Obviously, this is a very passionate issue. We can notice how the atmosphere got very, very intense. All right, we moved from a moment of celebration and almost triumphalism. How naive can we be? Jesus definitely worked with emotions. He did not avoid emotions. And the struggle was trying to bring emotions into law, the spirit of the law. I'm shaking even at the thoughts of speaking to you like this. If we haven't got Christ at the center, who have we at the center?
Thank you. Anybody else?
Sister, you mentioned one inmate that you knew of who had shown a lot of moral development or improvement while in prison. I was wondering if you could comment on your view of the prison system in terms of how it could be improved so that people aren't just kept there, but they're helped to grow and develop.
Yeah. I mean, what we have is this, close to 2 million people, and prisons are not places where moral development of the inmate or the people in it are the top priority. It's a place of punishment, warehousing, and the reform of the human being. And the Pope in his encyclical states that the first place of prisons is to make safety for society, but that human life can be restored. I talked to a little Quaker college earlier in the year, and they were so distressed because they were going into a prison teaching courses and helping people to get associate degrees. And then what happened is that Congress cut the Pell Grants. And what had happened is, I think that some victims' families had come and said, our daughter died, she didn't get to go to college, they're teaching them college in these prisons, they cut all the Pell Grants, and so they couldn't do the courses anymore in the prisons. And the track record showed that when prisoners are educated, partly what happens is they develop self-esteem and they know who they are and they can articulate without solving things with violence. And they showed that the recidivism rate dropped by over 70% of those who were in that educational program. And that all got cut. There's no emphasis on, or very little, on restoring human beings. And I give a lot of talks across this country, and we have a lot of people who are in criminal justice now simply because so many prisons have been built and people are going into prisons to work. Anybody sitting in here tonight who's thinking of going into that, there is a great need for human beings to go into prison. And there's a great need for prison visitation.
streams of citizens and people going into prison, because that's the only way we are ever going to reform the prison system. It's people who work in juvenile institutions, see young people going in and seeing the way they're treated. How can you learn to be a loving human being when you're subjected to subhuman and where, I mean, we all know that love makes us grow and care makes us grow and attention makes us grow. And so when you're thrown into situations where you have to protect your life, you could be raped, you could be hurt, you live under fear, you join gangs for protection, what happens to the human soul in that? We have barely scratched this. Human prisons are places of great abandonment. We don't go there. So it's to encourage everybody in here tonight, maybe not now, maybe you got to finish school. Dismas houses was started for people who came out of prison and students living together by Father Jack Hickey, who was a Catholic chaplain at Vanderbilt. You have a Dismas house here in South Bend, maybe some of you involved. And that's to help people when they come out of prison to be able to have a life and to be able to move back into the mainstream of society. You can't do it without community. How do you learn community in prison? Now, some miraculously flower in spite of it, but most of them don't. And so we have a huge challenge there, especially as more and more prisons are built. Okay, we're going to stop here, and I'll meet you over with the books. Those of you who want to get your books signed, thank you so much for coming tonight. It was great to be with you. But I just